Jack had liked Emma for 12 years. It started when they were in middle school, where he'd watch her from afar, too afraid to say anything. She was the kind of girl who seemed to shine effortlessly, always smiling, always surrounded by people. Over the years, Jack never confessed, choosing instead to be the silent protector, the friend who was always there. He knew everything about her. He knew that she loved chamomile tea, that she always twirled her pen when she was deep in thought, and that she had a habit of biting her lip when she was nervous. He watched as she fell for the wrong guys, as she cried over heartbreaks, as she moved forward, never once looking back at him. Jack told himself that being by her side was enough, that just being in her life was better than risking rejection and losing her completely. Then, one day, everything changed. Jack was at a cafe, sipping his usual black coffee, when his best friend Tom slid into the seat across from him. Tom looked at him with an expression that Jack immediately recognized: pity. "You need to move on, Jack," Tom said, stirring his latte lazily. Jack sighed, already knowing where this conversation was going. "We've had this talk before. And we'll have it again until you listen," Tom shot back. "You've wasted 12 years waiting for a girl who doesn't even see you that way." Jack clenched his jaw. "I don't need to move on." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me you're okay with watching her get married to someone else one day?" Jack's grip on his coffee tightened. Before he could respond, a familiar voice rang out from behind him. "Jack? Emma." Jack turned, his heart stuttering in his chest. She looked as radiant as ever, her hair cascading in soft waves, her eyes twinkling. She slid into the seat beside him, her warmth immediately enveloping him. "I was just about to call you," she said, grinning. "I have some big news." Jack's stomach twisted. He forced a smile. "Yeah, I'm getting engaged?" The words hit him like a freight train. The cafe seemed to go silent, his breath catching in his throat. Tom shot him a worried glance, but Jack forced his expression to remain neutral. "Wow," he said, voice steady. "That's great news," Emma beamed. "I wanted you to be the first to know. You've always been my best friend, Jack. I can't imagine this moment without you." Best friend? The words stung. Tom cleared his throat. "Who's the lucky guy?" Emma hesitated for a second before answering. "Daniel." Jack knew him. A businessman, charming, successful. He had seen them together before. It was clear Daniel adored her. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat. "I'm happy for you, Emma." And he meant it. No matter how much it hurt, he truly wanted her to be happy, but something inside him shifted that day. That night, he stared at his ceiling, his mind replaying the moment over and over again. He had loved her for 12 years. And in those 12 years, she had never once seen him as anything more than a friend. Maybe Tom was right. Maybe it was time to move on. And so, he made a decision, one that would change everything. The next morning, Jack met Tom again at the cafe. This time, he had something to say. "I'm getting married." Tom nearly choked on his coffee. "What?" Jack nodded, his expression unreadable. "I've made up my mind. I need to move forward. I can't keep waiting for something that'll never happen." Tom looked at him carefully. "Are you sure about this?" "Yeah." Jack exhaled. "I'm sure." That night, he sent a message to Emma. "Jack, hey, can we meet up? I have something to tell you." Emma, of course, when and where? Jack, tomorrow, the usual place. And just like that, everything was set in motion. Little did Emma know, the next time they met, Jack would say the words he never thought he'd say. "I'm getting married next week. I hope you can come." Emma arrived at their usual cafe with her usual bright smile, but this time, Jack wasn't nervous to see her. Something inside him had finally settled. She waved at him as she approached, her eyes twinkling. "Hey, you sounded serious in your text. What's up?" Jack studied her for a moment before gesturing for her to sit. He had imagined this moment over and over again, but now that it was happening, it felt surreal. He took a deep breath and said it. "I'm getting married next week." Emma's smile froze. The spoon in her hand slipped, clinking against the cup. "What?" Jack reached into his jacket, pulled out an invitation, and placed it on the table in front of her. The cream-colored envelope had golden cursive letters embossed on the front. It was elegant, simple, final. "I hope you can come," he added. Emma didn't move for a few seconds. It was as if time itself had paused between them. Then, slowly, she picked up the invitation with trembling fingers as if it were something fragile. "You're getting married," she repeated, as though saying it out loud would help her understand. Jack nodded. "Yeah," Emma swallowed hard. "To who?" Jack hesitated for a second before answering. "Ella," Emma blinked. "Ella, as in your coworker." Jack nodded again. We've been seeing each other for a while. I realized that waiting around for something that'll never happen isn't fair to me or to her. Emma's fingers tightened around the invitation. Her knuckles turned white. Jack, this is so sudden. Jack leaned back in his chair. Maybe for you, he said, forcing a small smile. But for me, this has been a long time coming. Emma opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked down at the invitation again, her expression unreadable. Jack, are you happy? She finally asked. Jack met her gaze, and for the first time in 12 years, he lied. Yeah, he said. I am. Emma's lips pressed together, and for a second, Jack saw something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. But then she smiled, that same warm, gentle smile she had always given him. Then I'm happy for you too. Jack felt something twist in his chest, but he ignored it. It would mean a lot if you came, he said. Emma hesitated, then nodded. Of course. I wouldn't miss it. Jack exhaled in relief. The waitress arrived to take their order, breaking the tension. Jack ordered a black coffee while Emma asked for chamomile tea, her usual. The same thing she had been drinking since high school. As they waited, silence stretched between them, a silence that felt different from the easy comfort they usually shared. Jack cleared his throat. So, how's the wedding planning going for you and Daniel? Emma looked startled for a moment, as if she had forgotten about her own engagement. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Oh, good. We're still deciding on a venue. Jack nodded. That's great, I'm sure it'll be beautiful. Yeah, Emma murmured. She stared at the invitation again, running her fingers over the embossed letters absent-mindedly. Jack watched her closely, trying to gauge her thoughts. Finally, she looked up at him. Jack, are you sure this is what you want? Jack stiffened slightly. Why wouldn't I be? Emma hesitated, searching his face. It's just, you never mentioned Ella before, and now all of a sudden you're getting married in a week? Jack forced a chuckle. What can I say? When you know, you know. Emma's lips parted as if she was about to say something, but then she closed them again. Instead, she nodded slowly. I guess so. The waitress returned with their drinks, placing them on the table. Emma took a sip of her tea, her fingers still wrapped tightly around the cup. Jack took a deep breath. Emma, I need you to understand something. She looked at him expectantly. This is my choice, he said firmly. I need to move forward with my life. I can't keep waiting for something that's never going to happen. Emma's fingers flinched around her cup, but she quickly composed herself. I understand. Jack watched her, trying to decipher her expression. She was smiling, but there was something else there, something hidden. Good, he said, because I really want you to be there. Emma nodded. I'll be there, Jack, I promise. Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. They finished their drinks in near silence, an unfamiliar tension lingering between them. When they finally stood to leave, Emma hesitated for a moment before speaking. Jack, she said softly. Yeah, she looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, then she simply smiled. Congratulations. Jack forced a smile. Thanks, Emma. As she walked away, Jack stood there, watching her go. He had gotten what he wanted, her blessing, her promise to attend, so why did he feel like something had just slipped through his fingers? As he left the cafe, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Ella. Ella, can't wait to see you tonight. Love you? Jack stared at the message for a moment before typing back a simple reply. Jack, me too. Love you too. But as he pressed send, his mind was still stuck on Emma's face when he had told her the news. And for the first time in 12 years, he wondered, did he really want her to come? Jack sat in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, the glow of his bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room. The wedding was only a few days away, yet he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest since his conversation with Emma. He should feel excited. Ella was wonderful, kind, patient, and understanding. She had been nothing but supportive of him since they started dating. She deserved his full attention, his full commitment. So why couldn't he stop thinking about the look in Emma's eyes when he had told her? Jack ran a hand through his hair and reached for his phone. His fingers hovered over Emma's contact for a long moment before he sighed and tossed the phone onto the bed. He was being ridiculous. Instead, he pulled himself together, got dressed, and headed out to meet Ella for dinner. Ella greeted him with a warm smile when he arrived at the restaurant. She looked radiant in a soft blue dress, her dark curls pinned up neatly. She reached for his hand as he sat down across from her. You're late, she teased, though there was no real irritation in her voice. Jack forced a smile, got caught up with work. Ella tilted her head, studying him for a moment. You okay? You seem distracted. Jack hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, just a lot on my mind. Eller reached across the table, squeezing his hand. It's normal to feel overwhelmed before the wedding. But don't worry, we're in this together, okay? Jack nodded, though her words didn't quite settle the storm inside him. The conversation moved on to wedding details, seating arrangements, last-minute confirmations, the honeymoon plans. Jack nodded and responded where needed, but he found himself zoning out, his thoughts drifting back to Emma. He hadn't asked if she was bringing Daniel. He wasn't even sure if they were still engaged. Would it bother him if she did? He shook the thought away. Jack? He blinked, realizing Ella had been speaking. Sorry, what? Ella's eyes narrowed slightly, but she kept her voice gentle. I said your mom called me today. She's so excited about the wedding. She was telling me stories about you as a kid. Jack chuckled. Oh God, what did she say? Ella grinned. Something about you refusing to let go of a stray puppy you found when you were 5. Apparently, you cried for days when your dad said you couldn't keep it. Jack laughed, shaking his head. Yeah, that sounds about right. Ella watched him with a soft smile. You have such a big heart, Jack. Jack looked at her, and for a moment he felt guilty. Ella deserved someone who was fully present, someone who wasn't haunted by the past. He pushed Emma out of his mind. This was his future. He needed to embrace it. Later that night, Jack walked through the quiet streets, taking the long route home. The city buzzed with life around him, but inside he felt strangely detached. His feet led him to a familiar spot before he even realized where he was going. The park. Their park. He and Emma had spent countless evenings here as teenagers, lying on the grass and talking about everything and nothing. It had always been their place, a small pocket of the world where nothing else mattered. Jack sat on one of the old benches, staring up at the sky. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, hesitating for a moment before finally dialing the number. The phone rang 3 times before Emma picked up. Jack? Her voice was soft, laced with surprise. Jack exhaled. Hey, are you busy? There was a pause. No, what's up? Jack hesitated before speaking. I'm at the park. Another pause. Then quietly, I'll be there in 10. Emma arrived exactly 10 minutes later, wrapped in a light sweater, her hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She looked at him, then at the empty space beside him on the bench. Without a word, she sat down. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Emma let out a soft chuckle. You know, it's been years since we sat here like this. Jack smiled faintly. Yeah, Emma glanced at him. What's on your mind, Jack? Jack stared ahead at the darkened trees, the lamplight casting soft shadows across the pavement. I don't know, he admitted. I just needed to see you. Emma was quiet for a long time. Then finally she said, I get it. Jack turned to look at her. Do you? Emma nodded, hugging her arms around herself. Yeah, this place, it holds a lot of memories. She exhaled, her breath visible in the cool night air. It's strange, isn't it? How time changes things? Jack watched her, feeling something heavy settle in his chest. Yeah, Emma glanced at him. Are you happy, Jack? Jack hesitated. And in that moment, with the city lights flickering in the distance and the echoes of their past all around them, he knew he couldn't lie. I don't know, he admitted. Emma looked down at her hands, her fingers playing with the fabric of her sweater. Jack leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. I thought I would be. I thought moving on was the right thing. But now, he trailed off, shaking his head. I don't know. Emma was silent. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, Did you ever think about telling me? Jack's breath caught. He didn't need to ask what she meant. 12 years. 12 years of loving her in silence. 12 years of waiting for something that never came. Jack closed his eyes. I did. He turned to look at her. But I was scared. Emma met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Scared of what? Jack let out a bitter chuckle. Of losing you. Emma's eyes softened, and for a moment Jack thought he saw something there, something unspoken, something raw. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then, just as quickly, she closed it. Jack swallowed. Would it have made a difference? Emma inhaled sharply, looking away. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Then finally she whispered, I don't know. Jack's chest tightened. He nodded, forcing a small smile. That's fair. Emma looked back at him, her eyes searching his. Jack, if you're having doubts, you don't have to go through with it. Jack exhaled sharply. I can't do that to Ella. Emma nodded slowly, though her expression was pained. I understand. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling inside him. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Emma let out a soft laugh, though it held no humor. When do things ever go the way they're supposed to? Jack stared at her, desperately wanting, to say something, to do something. But instead, he just nodded. Emma stood up, wrapping her arms around herself. We should go. It's late. Jack hesitated before standing beside her. They walked in silence toward the park's exit, side by side but miles apart. And for the first time in 12 years, Jack wished he had been brave enough to tell her sooner. Jack barely slept that night. His conversation with Emma replayed in his mind like a broken record, each word digging deeper into the parts of himself he had tried so hard to ignore. Would it have made a difference? I don't know. That was the answer that haunted him the most. Not a no, not a rejection, just uncertainty. And uncertainty meant there had been a possibility, however small, that things could have been different. Jack got up before the sun rose, throwing on a jacket and stepping outside for some air. New York was quiet in the early morning, the usual chaos subdued beneath the weight of dawn. He walked aimlessly, his thoughts heavier with each step. He had spent so long trying to move on from Emma, convincing himself that she would never see him that way. But now, on the brink of his wedding, it felt like the past was clawing its way back into his life, demanding to be acknowledged. And for the first time, Jack wasn't sure what to do. The day before the wedding was a blur of last-minute preparations. Jack kept himself busy, helping Ella finalize the guest list, confirming the catering, and double-checking the venue. He forced himself to focus, to be present, but the nagging feeling in his chest refused to leave him. In the afternoon, he received a text from Tom. Tom, she's coming, Emma. Jack stared at the message for a long time, his heart pounding in his chest. Of course she was coming. She had said she would. But now, faced with the reality of seeing her again, at his wedding, no less, Jack felt something dangerously close to panic. Would she bring Daniel? Would she sit in the crowd watching him say vows to another woman? Jack exhaled, rubbing his face. This was what he had chosen. He needed to accept it. But why did it feel like he was making the biggest mistake of his life? That evening, Jack met Tom at a bar near his apartment. He needed to talk to someone, needed to clear his head. Tom greeted him with a knowing look. You look like hell. Jack let out a dry laugh. Feel like it too. Tom ordered them both a drink before leaning forward. So, wanna tell me what's going on? Jack hesitated, then sighed. I saw Emma. Tom's eyebrows shot up. When? Last night, at the park? Tom let out a low whistle. Man, you really know how to complicate things. Jack took a sip of his drink, his grip tightening around the glass. I didn't plan it, I just needed to see her. Tom studied him for a moment before sighing. And? Jack looked down. And now I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Tom leaned back in his chair. Jack, let me ask you something. Do you love Ella? Jack hesitated. I care about her. That's not what I asked. Jack clenched his jaw, staring at the table. I don't want to hurt her. That's still not what I asked. Jack exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I thought I could love her, and maybe in some way I do. But it's not. He stopped himself, swallowing hard. Tom nodded. It's not Emma. Jack closed his eyes. No, it's not. Tom sighed. Jack, I've known you for years. I've watched you look at Emma like she's the only person in the world, and I've watched you try to convince yourself that you could move on. But let's be real, you never did. Jack clenched his fists. It's too late. Is it? Tom leaned forward. Because you're standing at a crossroads, man, and if you go through with this wedding, you need to be damn sure it's what you really want. Otherwise, you're not just ruining your life, you're ruining Ella's too. Jack swallowed the lump in his throat. What am I supposed to do? Call off the wedding? Tom shrugged. If that's what it takes. Jack let out a bitter laugh. It's not that simple. Tom gave him a long, measured look. It is if you stop being a coward. Jack flinched. Tom sighed. Look, I'm not telling you to break Ella's heart. I'm telling you to be honest with yourself and with her. You owe her that much. Jack rubbed his temples. I don't even know what Emma wants. Tom shook his head. That's the thing, Jack. You never asked. Jack fell silent, and for the first time he realized Tom was right. That night, Jack sat in his apartment, staring at his phone again. His fingers hovered over Emma's number, his chest tightening. Then finally he made the call. She picked up on the second ring. Jack? Jack exhaled. Hey, can we meet? Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, okay. They met at the same park, under the same lamplight. Emma stood with her arms wrapped around herself, looking at Jack with something unreadable in her eyes. What's going on? She asked. Jack took a deep breath. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Emma nodded slowly. Okay, Jack's voice was unsteady. If I had told you back then, if I had told you how I felt, would it have mattered? Emma inhaled sharply, her expression flickering with something Jack couldn't quite place. Then quietly she whispered, yes. Jack's heart stopped. Emma looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. It would have mattered, Jack, more than you'll ever know. Jack swallowed. Then why? Because you never said anything, Emma interrupted, her voice breaking. And I thought you didn't feel the same way. Jack clenched his fists. I was scared. Emma let out a bitter laugh. So was I. They stood there in silence, the weight of 12 years pressing down on them. Jack took a shaky breath. It's not too late. Emma's eyes widened. Jack, I need to know, he said, stepping closer. If I call off the wedding, if I choose you, would you want that? Emma stared at him, her lips trembling. Then finally she whispered, I don't know. Jack felt his stomach drop. Emma wrapped her arms around herself. I don't know if I can trust you, Jack. You spent 12 years staying silent, and now, on the eve of your wedding, you want me to believe that I'm what you really want? Jack's throat tightened. You are. Emma shook her head, tears in her eyes. Then why did it take you this long to say it? Jack had no answer. Emma exhaled shakily. I can't do this, Jack, not like this. Jack felt his heart shatter. Emma turned away. Goodbye, Jack. And with that, she walked away, leaving him standing in the darkness, alone. Jack stood frozen, watching Emma disappear into the night. His mind screamed for him to chase after her, to beg her to stay, to tell her that she had always been his choice. He had just been too afraid to say it. But his feet wouldn't move. She was right. He had spent 12 years keeping his feelings locked away, and now, at the final hour, he expected her to believe he had finally made up his mind. Jack sank onto the park bench, his hands gripping his head. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had been a coward all along. Not just with Emma, but with his entire life. He had convinced himself that marrying Ella was the right choice because it was safe, because it was what he should do. But love wasn't about safety. Love wasn't about convenience. Love was Emma. And now he had lost her. The morning of the wedding arrived too quickly. Jack stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his crisp white shirt. His tuxedo fit perfectly, tailored to match the expectations of a man who was supposed to be stepping into his future. But as he stared at his reflection, all he saw was a man drowning in regret. The weight in his chest was unbearable. His hands trembled as he buttoned his vest. His mind screamed at him to stop, to turn back, to not go through with this. He had barely slept. His conversation with Emma replayed in his head over and over again, her words haunting him. Why did it take you this long to say it? Because he had been afraid. Because he had convinced himself that Emma was never an option. Because he had tried so hard to move on, even when his heart refused to. There was a knock at the door. Tom stepped in, dressed in his suit, looking serious. You look like you're about to throw up, Tom said, leaning against the doorframe. Jack let out a weak chuckle. I feel like it. Tom studied him for a long moment before sighing. Jack, don't do this. Jack stiffened. What? Tom stepped forward. You don't love Ella, not the way you should. And you do love Emma, we both know that. Jack clenched his jaw. I can't just call off the wedding. Tom crossed his arms. Why not? Jack let out a frustrated breath. Because it's too late. People are already arriving, Ella. Would you rather hurt her now or spend the rest of your life pretending? Tom interrupted. Jack went silent. Tom sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, man, I know you don't want to break her heart, but marrying someone out of obligation is worse than leaving her at the altar. It's not fair to either of you. Jack swallowed hard. She doesn't deserve this. No, Tom agreed. She deserves someone who loves her completely, and you're not that guy. Jack's chest tightened. Tom gave him a long look. If you don't love her, then don't marry her. It's that simple. Jack stared at the floor, his heart pounding. He knew Tom was right. And suddenly, Jack knew what he had to do. The venue was filled with guests. White roses decorated the altar, sunlight streaming through the grand windows of the chapel. Ella stood in the back room, dressed in a stunning white gown, glowing with anticipation. Jack's heart twisted painfully as he walked toward her. She turned to him with a bright smile. Jack, you're not supposed to see me before the ceremony. Jack's throat felt like sandpaper. Ella, we need to talk. Her smile faltered. What's wrong? Jack took a shaky breath. I can't do this. Ella blinked, confusion flashing across her face. What? Jack felt his heart break as he forced the words out. I can't marry you. For a moment, Ella just stood there, as if she hadn't heard him correctly. Then her expression changed. Jack, this isn't funny. I'm not joking. Jack's voice was barely above a whisper. Ella's hands trembled. Why? Jack swallowed past the lump in his throat. Because I don't love you the way you deserve to be loved. Tears welled in Ella's eyes. Is this about her? Jack closed his eyes. Yes. Ella let out a shaky breath, and when he looked at her again, there was something heartbreaking in her expression. I always knew, she whispered. Jack stiffened. Ella wiped at her tears. I always knew you didn't love me the way you loved her. I hoped you'd learn to. Jack's chest ached. Ella, don't, she interrupted, forcing a small, sad smile. You're doing the right thing, Jack, even if it hurts. Jack felt his own eyes burn. I'm so sorry, Ella exhaled, nodding. Me too. The silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Ella reached for his hand, giving it a squeeze. Go, before it's too late. Jack's heart pounded. He didn't waste another second. Jack ran, out of the venue, past the shocked guests, past the judgmental stares and the whispered gossip. He ran because he couldn't waste another moment. He had already wasted 12 years. Now he was done running from his heart. Now he was running toward it. He reached Emma's apartment, breathless and desperate. He banged on the door, his heart slamming against his ribs. No answer. Jack cursed, stepping back. Then he spotted someone locking their door across the hall. Hey, do you know where Emma is? The neighbor raised an eyebrow. She left for the airport, said she was flying out today. Jack felt his stomach drop. Which airport? LaGuardia? Jack didn't even hesitate. He turned and sprinted. He arrived at the airport, breathless and frantic, scanning the departure boards. There it was, Emma's flight, boarding soon. Jack ran through the terminal like a madman, pushing past travelers, ignoring the protests. He didn't care. He couldn't care, then there. Emma stood near the gate, suitcase in hand, her back was turned, her posture tense. Jack didn't stop to think. Emma, he shouted. She turned, eyes wide. Jack? Jack ran up to her, chest heaving. Don't go. Emma stared at him, stunned. What are you doing here? Jack grabbed her hands, holding them tightly. I called off the wedding. Emma's breath hitched. What? Jack swallowed hard. Because I love you. I always have, and I was an idiot for never telling you. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Jack cupped her face. I don't want to spend another second pretending. I want you, Emma. I always have. A tear slipped down her cheek. You broke my heart, Jack. I know, he whispered. Let me fix it. Silence. Then, Emma dropped her suitcase and crashed into him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Jack held her like his life depended on it. And maybe, in some way, it did. Jack held Emma tightly, his heart pounding against his ribs, as if it was trying to make up for the 12 years it had spent silent. Her arms were wrapped around him, her face buried against his shoulder, and for the first time in his life he felt whole. The noise of the airport buzzed around them, people rushing to their gates, flight announcements echoing overhead, but none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the woman in his arms. Emma pulled back slightly, her hands gripping the front of his shirt. You really called off the wedding? She asked, as if she still couldn't believe it. Jack nodded. Yes. Her gaze searched his face, trying to find any sign of hesitation, any trace of doubt. For me? For us, Jack corrected softly. For what I should have chosen years ago. Emma swallowed, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. I was ready to leave, Jack. I was ready to walk away from this pain. Jack's hands cradled her face gently. I know, and I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. A small, broken laugh escaped her lips. You really are an idiot, Jack smiled. I am, but I'm your idiot if you'll still have me. Emma exhaled shakily. I don't know if I can just forget everything, Jack. You hurt me. I don't want to be second choice. Jack tightened his grip on her hands. You were never my second choice, Emma. You were my only choice. I was just too afraid to admit it. Emma stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed and pressed her forehead against his chest. You owe me 12 years of making up for it, she muttered. Jack let out a breath of relief, pulling her closer. I'll spend every second of the rest of my life doing just that. They left the airport together, Jack's fingers intertwined with Emma's, as if he was afraid to let go now that he finally had her. Tom called him the moment they got into the cab. Dude, did you actually do it? Jack let out a small laugh. Yeah, I did. Tom let out a low whistle. Wow, I mean, I knew you had feelings for Emma, but I honestly didn't think you had the guts to call off the wedding. Jack glanced at Emma, who was watching him with quiet amusement. Turns out I had more guts than I thought. Tom chuckled. Well, you better make it count, because Ella, He hesitated. Jack's stomach twisted. How is she? She's upset. But honestly, she took it better than I expected. I think she knew deep down that you weren't in love with her. She deserves someone who's crazy about her, not someone who's been hung up on another woman for 12 years. Jack let out a slow breath. Yeah, she does. Just don't mess this up with Emma, Tom added. You don't get another 12 years to figure it out. Jack tightened his grip on Emma's hand. I won't. After ending the call, he turned to Emma. So, where do we go from here? Emma raised an eyebrow. You're the one who just called off his wedding, you tell me. Jack chuckled. How about we start with dinner? Emma rolled her eyes but smiled. Smooth. But she didn't say no. Over the next few weeks, things between Jack and Emma were complicated. There was no easy fix for 12 years of missed chances and broken hearts. Some days were perfect. They'd spend hours talking, catching up on everything they had missed in each other's lives. They went on long walks, laughed until their stomachs hurt, and made up for lost time. But other days were harder. Emma still struggled to trust him completely. She had spent so many years convincing herself that Jack would never choose her, that it was difficult to believe he finally had. There were moments when doubt crept in, when old wounds resurfaced, when she'd pull away just a little. Jack understood, and he was patient. He showed up for her every single day, proving with every action, every word, that she wasn't a consolation prize. She was the love of his life, and little by little, Emma began to believe it. One evening, they found themselves back at the park, the same park where Jack had shattered Emma's heart. This time, things were different. They sat on the bench together, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Emma rested her head on Jack's shoulder, and he traced lazy circles on the back of her hand. I used to sit here and imagine what it would be like if you ever loved me back, Emma admitted softly. Jack's chest tightened. He kissed the top of her head. And, Emma let out a small, content sigh. Reality is better, Jack smiled. I'm glad. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and warm. Then after a moment, Jack shifted slightly. Emma, she hummed in response. He took a deep breath, his heart hammering in his chest. Marry me. Emma froze. Jack turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers. I don't have a ring yet, and I know it's soon, but... Emma placed a finger over his lips, silencing him. Then, with a soft smile, she whispered, yes. Jack's heart nearly burst. Yeah, Emma nodded. Yes, you idiot. Jack let out a breathless laugh, cupping her face and pressing his forehead against hers. I love you, Emma, she smiled, eyes shining. I love you too. And just like that, after 12 years of missed chances, of almosts and what-ifs, of unspoken words and broken hearts, they finally got it right. Jack couldn't stop staring at Emma. She had just said yes. After 12 years of longing, of missed chances, of heartache, she had agreed to marry him. Emma, the girl who had loved him when he was too blind to see it, the girl who had nearly walked away, who had every reason to doubt him. And yet here she was, choosing him anyway. Jack's hands trembled as he held her face between them, his forehead pressed against hers. Say it again, he whispered, almost afraid he had imagined it. Emma let out a soft laugh. Yes. Jack exhaled in relief, his lips curving into a smile. One more time. She rolled her eyes but humored him anyway. Yes, Jack, he grinned, brushing a kiss against her forehead. I don't deserve you. Emma cupped his cheek, her thumb tracing over his jaw. Maybe not, but I love you anyway. Jack kissed her then, deep and slow, pouring every ounce of love, regret, and promise into that one moment. They had spent too many years apart. He wasn't going to waste another second. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Jack had to officially break the news to everyone, including his family, friends, and, most daunting of all, Ella. Surprisingly, Ella took it with quiet grace. I figured this would happen, she admitted when Jack met her for coffee. You were never really mine, Jack. Jack swallowed hard, guilt gnawing at his insides. I'm sorry, Ella, you didn't deserve this. She shook her head with a small smile. No, I didn't, but I'll be okay. I deserve someone who loves me the way you love her. Jack nodded. You do. Ella exhaled, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. You know, I always envied Emma. Even when you were mine, a part of you was always hers. She smiled wryly. I hope you make her happy. Jack's voice was firm. I will. Ella sighed, then extended her hand toward him. Then congratulations, Jack. Really? Jack hesitated for a moment before shaking her hand. It was the last thread tying him to his past, the final closure he needed. When he walked away from that coffee shop, he felt lighter. Emma, on the other hand, was still adjusting. She had spent so long believing Jack would never be hers that accepting this new reality felt surreal. She was engaged to the man she had loved for 12 years, and yet there were still moments when doubt whispered in her mind. What if he changes his mind? She asked Tom one evening as they sat in her apartment. Tom gave her a deadpan look. Emma, the guy called off his wedding for you. He literally turned his whole life upside down. I don't think he's going anywhere. Emma bit her lip. But what if he regrets it later? What if? Tom groaned, cutting her off. Look, I get it. You've spent years convincing yourself that Jack would never pick you, so it's hard to believe that he finally has. But Emma, you won. He wants you. Don't push him away because you're scared. Emma let out a slow breath. I don't want to push him away. Then don't, Tom said simply. Easier said than done. Jack noticed the way Emma sometimes hesitated when he reached for her hand, the way she occasionally looked at him as if she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it broke his heart. One evening, he decided enough was enough. They were at his apartment, curled up on the couch, when he took her hands in his. Emma, he said softly, I need you to talk to me. She blinked. I am talking to you. Jack shook his head. Not really, he exhaled. You're still scared, aren't you? Emma hesitated. I don't want to wake up one day and realize this was a mistake for you. Jack cupped her face, forcing her to look at him. Emma, you are not a mistake. You're the only thing I've been sure about in my entire life. Emma swallowed. But what if? Jack cut her off with a kiss. A slow, lingering kiss that left her breathless. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. No more what ifs, Em. No more doubts. It's you. It's always been you. Emma let out a shaky breath, nodding. Okay. Jack kissed her again, sealing the promise between them. Their wedding was small and intimate, just as they wanted. Tom was Jack's best man, and Emma's sister stood by her side. Ella didn't attend, but she sent a short, simple message, I wish you both happiness. Jack had never felt surer of anything in his life as he stood at the altar, watching Emma walk toward him. She was breathtaking, and she was his. When she finally reached him, he took her hands in his and whispered, I love you. Emma's eyes shimmered. I love you too. As they exchanged vows, as they promised forever to each other, Jack realized something. 12 years had been a long time to wait, but some things, some people were worth waiting for, and Emma, she was worth every second. Jack had always imagined what life with Emma might be like, but reality was so much better. Their honeymoon was short but perfect, a quiet getaway to a coastal town, just the two of them. They spent days walking along the beach, talking for hours, rediscovering each other in ways they never had before. Emma had been his best friend once. Now she was his wife. It still felt surreal. One evening, as they watched the sun dip below the horizon, Emma turned to him, her fingers laced with his. Do you ever wonder how different things would have been if we had gotten together sooner? Jack thought about it for a moment. If he had noticed Emma's feelings earlier, if he had chosen her instead of chasing someone else. If he had never proposed to Ella, would things have been easier? Maybe. But then again, they might not have been ready. Jack squeezed her hand. Maybe we needed to go through everything to end up here. Emma smiled softly. I like the way you think. Jack pulled her closer. I like the way you love me. That night, wrapped in each other's arms, they both knew, no matter what the past had been, this was their future. And it was just beginning. Back in New York, real life started creeping in. Jack had a demanding job, and Emma was adjusting to her new role at a publishing house. Their days were long, their schedules sometimes chaotic, but they always made time for each other. One evening, Jack came home to find Emma asleep on the couch, a manuscript open on her chest. He smiled, carefully lifting the papers and setting them aside before tucking a blanket around her. She stirred, blinking up at him sleepily. You're home. Jack kissed her forehead. I'm home. Emma sat up, rubbing her eyes. Did you eat? Jack chuckled. Did you? Emma hesitated, then pouted. I was going to, but then I got caught up in work. Jack sighed playfully. Come on, Mrs. Dawson, let's feed you before you waste away. Emma giggled as he pulled her up, leading her to the kitchen. Even in the midst of their busy lives, they had these moments, quiet, simple, filled with love. And that was enough. But not everything was easy. Marriage came with challenges. Jack had always been independent, used to making decisions on his own. Emma, on the other hand, was used to doing things a certain way after years of living alone. Their first real argument happened over something ridiculously small. Toothpaste? Jack groaned, rubbing his temples. We are really fighting about toothpaste? Emma crossed her arms. It's not just toothpaste, Jack, it's about consideration. I like the tube rolled up neatly and you just squeeze from the middle like a monster. Jack stared at her, half exasperated, half amused. Emma, love of my life, light of my world, are we really about to go to war over toothpaste? Emma huffed, grabbing the offending tube from the sink and dramatically demonstrating how it should be rolled. Jack watched her, biting back a smile. You're really passionate about this, huh? Yes, she said, scowling. Because if we don't fix this now, what's next? You start leaving wet towels on the bed, eating in bed, forgetting our anniversary? Jack held up his hands in surrender. Okay, okay, I promise to roll the toothpaste. Emma eyed him suspiciously. Really? Jack grinned. Scout's honor. She narrowed her eyes. You were never a scout. Jack smirked, pulling her into his arms. Maybe not, but I'm a husband now, and if rolling toothpaste makes my wife happy, then consider it done. Emma sighed dramatically. Thank you, Jack chuckled. You're adorable when you're mad, you know that? Emma swatted his arm, but she was laughing too. The argument, as ridiculous as it was, taught them something important. Love wasn't about never disagreeing. It was about learning how to disagree, and more importantly, how to make up afterward. Months passed and their love deepened, but there were still ghosts from the past lurking in the corners. One evening, Jack came home late to find Emma sitting on the balcony, lost in thought. He joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Penny for your thoughts? Emma hesitated before speaking. I ran into Ella today. Jack stiffened. Oh, Emma turned to look at him. She seems okay, she's dating someone new. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That's good, she deserves to be happy. Emma nodded. She does. She was quiet for a moment before adding, I told her I was sorry. Jack frowned. For what? Emma sighed. For everything, for how things happened. Even though none of it was planned, I still felt guilty. Jack took her hand. Emma, what happened with Ella wasn't your fault. I know, she said softly, but it still hurt her. Jack kissed her temple. Yeah, but she's moving on, and so are we. Emma leaned into him. I know. The past would always be there, a reminder of the choices they had made, but the future, that was theirs to write. A year into their marriage, something happened that changed everything. Emma was late. By 2 weeks. At first, she thought it was just stress. Work had been hectic and she'd been running on caffeine and deadlines. But then the nausea started, and the exhaustion, and the craving for the weirdest things, like pickles and peanut butter together. Jack found her one morning, staring at a pregnancy test in their bathroom. Emma? His voice was groggy with sleep. What's going on? Emma turned, holding up the test with trembling fingers. Jack blinked at it, then at her. Then back at the test. Silence, then, are we? His voice cracked. Are we having a baby? Emma nodded, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I think so. Jack's breath left him in a rush. A baby, their baby. He let out a shaky laugh, running a hand through his hair. Wow. Emma bit her lip. You're okay with this, right? Jack looked at her like she had lost her mind. Emma, this is the best news of my life. A sob escaped her as Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. A baby. A family. Their next chapter had just begun, and Jack couldn't wait to see what the future held. Jack had thought he knew what happiness felt like, but nothing, compared to the feeling of knowing that he and Emma were going to have a baby. He found himself staring at her more often, marveling at the fact that the woman he had loved for 12 years was now carrying his child. It was surreal, exciting, and just a little bit terrifying. Emma, on the other hand, was already deep in planning mode. We need to set up a doctor's appointment, she said one morning, flipping through a pregnancy book. And start looking at baby names. Oh, and figure out how we're going to turn the guest room into a nursery. Should we go with neutral colors, or do you think we should wait until we know the gender? Jack grinned, watching her ramble. I love how you went from we just found out to let's paint the nursery in under 24 hours. Emma huffed. I like to be prepared, Jack chuckled, pulling her into his lap. And I love that about you, she sighed, relaxing against him. Are you scared? Jack thought about it for a moment. A little. Emma tilted her head. Yeah, Jack nodded. Not about being a dad, but what if I mess up? What if I don't do things right? Emma took his hand, lacing their fingers together. We're going to figure it out together. Jack kissed the top of her head. Yeah, we are. And just like that, the fear didn't seem so overwhelming anymore. The first doctor's visit made everything feel real. Jack held Emma's hand as they watched the tiny flickering heartbeat on the ultrasound screen. That's our baby, Emma whispered, eyes shimmering with emotion. Jack's throat tightened. Yeah, he murmured. That's our baby. He never knew he could love someone he hadn't even met yet, but he already did. Pregnancy, as it turned out, was no joke. Jack had read books, he had watched videos, he had mentally prepared himself, but nothing had quite prepared him for Emma's pregnancy cravings. One night, Jack was jolted awake by Emma shaking his shoulder. Jack, he groaned. Emma nudged him again. Jack, wake up. He blinked blearily at her. What's wrong? She gave him a sheepish look. I need ice cream. Jack stared. It's 3 in the morning. I know, but I really need it. Jack sighed, rubbing his face. All right, what kind? Emma grinned. Vanilla with pickles. Jack blinked. With what? Emma nodded. Pickles. Jack stared at her for a long moment before finally dragging himself out of bed. I love you, he muttered as he pulled on a hoodie. Emma beamed. I love you more. Jack shook his head as he grabbed his keys. This was definitely going to be an adventure. But not everything about pregnancy was fun and cravings. As Emma's belly grew, so did her discomfort. Some nights she couldn't sleep at all. Jack would stay up with her, rubbing her back, whispering words of comfort. Other times, she'd burst into tears over the smallest things. One afternoon, Jack walked into the living room to find Emma sobbing on the couch. Alarmed, he rushed over. Emma, what happened? She sniffled, pointing at the TV. The dog in the commercial was so happy. Jack blinked. Then he did the only thing he could. He pulled her into his arms and let her cry it out. Pregnancy hormones were no joke. Then came the kicking. Jack had felt excited when the doctor told them they'd start feeling movement soon. But when it actually happened, it blew his mind. One evening, Emma grabbed his hand and placed it on her belly. Wait, she whispered. Just wait. Jack held his breath. And then thump. His eyes went wide. Was that? Emma giggled. Yeah. Jack felt another tiny kick against his palm. His heart swelled. Hey, kiddo, he murmured, stroking Emma's belly. It's your dad. Emma's eyes softened as she watched him. Jack met her gaze. I can't wait to meet them, Emma smiled. Me neither. As they got closer to the due date, reality set in. This was happening. Their tiny apartment slowly transformed as they set up a crib, folded tiny onesies, and stacked diapers in the corner. Jack found himself staring at the nursery more often than he cared to admit. Emma caught him one night standing in the doorway, looking lost in thought. She walked up to him, resting a hand on his back. What's on your mind? Jack let out a breath. I want to be a good dad. Emma wrapped her arms around him. You will be, Jack sighed, leaning into her. I hope so. Emma pulled back just enough to look at him. Jack, our baby is going to have the best dad in the world because he's going to have you. Jack kissed her softly. And they're going to have the best mom. Emma smiled. I like to think so. They stood there, holding each other, knowing that their world was about to change forever. Then came the day everything really changed. Emma's water broke at 3 in the morning. Jack had never moved so fast in his life. They barely made it to the hospital before the contractions started getting unbearable. Emma squeezed Jack's hand, hard. I swear to God, Jack, she growled between breaths. You did this to me. Jack winced. I'm so sorry, the nurse chuckled. Don't worry, they all say that. Jack gave Emma an apologetic smile, but she just groaned as another contraction hit. For hours, Jack stayed by her side, whispering words of encouragement, wiping her forehead, doing everything he could to support her. And then a baby's cry filled the room. Jack felt his heart stop. The doctor turned to them with a smile. Congratulations, it's a girl. Jack exhaled, his eyes immediately filling with tears. Then they placed her in Emma's arms. Jack had thought he had known love before, but looking at his daughter, so tiny, so perfect, he realized he had never known love like this. Emma gazed down at their baby, tears slipping down her cheeks. She's beautiful. Jack reached out, brushing a finger against her little hand. The baby's fingers curled around his. Jack let out a shaky breath. Hi, baby girl, Emma smiled at him. We did it? Jack swallowed hard. Yeah, we did. He kissed his wife's forehead, then looked back at their daughter. She was everything, and in that moment, Jack knew his life had truly begun. Jack never thought he could love anyone more than he loved Emma. Then he met his daughter. From the moment she was placed in his arms, something inside him shifted. It was as if the universe had restructured itself around this tiny, delicate life. He had spent years thinking about love, what it meant, how it changed, how it grew. But holding his daughter, he realized something profound. Love wasn't just something you felt. It was something you became. The first few weeks of parenthood were a blur of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. Jack had always been confident, at work, in life, in his relationship with Emma. But nothing had humbled him more than trying to soothe a wailing newborn at 3 in the morning. Emma, despite her exhaustion, took to motherhood with grace. She would rock their daughter in her arms, whispering soft lullabies, her voice filled with a love that was almost tangible. Jack, on the other hand, was a work in progress. One night, after yet another failed attempt at getting the baby to sleep, he collapsed onto the couch with a groan. Emma sat beside him, their daughter finally dozing in her arms. "Rough night?" she teased. Jack ran a hand through his hair. "I don't get it. I did everything the book said. I swayed, I hummed, I even tried talking to her about real estate and she still screamed at me." Emma laughed softly. "Maybe she's just not interested in the housing market yet." Jack sighed dramatically. "I'm starting to take it personally." Emma leaned against him. "You're doing great, Jack." He looked at her, his heart squeezing. "You really think so?" Emma smiled. "I know so." Jack kissed her forehead, then glanced at their sleeping daughter. "She's lucky to have you." Emma nudged him. "She's lucky to have us." And for the first time in weeks, Jack believed it. Months passed and life found a new rhythm. Their daughter, whom they had named Lily, grew faster than Jack thought possible. One day, she was a fragile newborn curled against his chest. The next, she was giggling, reaching for his face with tiny fingers. Jack became that dad, the one who took 1,000 pictures of every little milestone. Emma teased him for it, but she never complained when he sent her videos of Lily's laughter while she was at work. One evening, Jack sat on the floor with Lily, stacking blocks while Emma cooked dinner. Lily knocked the tower over, squealing with delight. Jack gasped dramatically. "Did you do that?" Lily giggled, her bright eyes shining. Jack rebuilt the tower only for her to knock it down again. Emma glanced over, amused. "You do realize she's going to keep doing that, right?" Jack shrugged. "It's a good life lesson." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Oh," Jack smirked. "Sometimes things fall apart, but you just rebuild." Emma chuckled. "Very deep, Jack." Jack grinned. "Hey, she might be a genius in the making." Lily babbled in response, smacking the blocks. Jack beamed. "See, she agrees." Emma rolled her eyes, but there was warmth in them. "You two are ridiculous." Jack pulled Lily into his arms, pressing a kiss to her chubby cheek. "And you love us for it." Emma smiled. "Yeah, I really do." The years passed in a series of beautiful, fleeting moments. Lily took her first steps in their living room, her tiny hands reaching for Jack as he cheered her on. She spoke her first word, Dada, and Jack spent the rest of the day bragging about it to everyone. They spent summers at the park, winters building pillow forts, and countless nights reading bedtime stories until Lily drifted off to sleep. Through it all, Jack and Emma's love only grew stronger. It wasn't always easy. There were stressful days, disagreements, and sleepless nights. But no matter what, they faced everything together. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Jack and Emma sat on the balcony watching the city lights. Jack took Emma's hand. "Can you believe how far we've come?" Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. 12 years of silent love, and now a lifetime together." Jack smiled. "If I had told my past self that this is where we'd end up, I don't think he would have believed it." Emma chuckled. "Neither would I." Jack turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I loved you then, I love you now, and I'll love you for the rest of my life." Emma's eyes softened. "Forever," Jack kissed her gently. "Forever." And in that moment he knew his love story had never been about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was about this: a quiet, steady love that had stood the test of time, a love that would last a lifetime.